It was supposed to be just another quiet funeral on an overcast day, but an unexpected scream rips through the air, claiming the deceased is still alive. The ceremony descends into chaos, and long-buried secrets begin to surface. What began as mourning transforms into a dark mystery no one was prepared to face. If this story has you hooked, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Now back to the story. The afternoon in New York City carried that typical grey weight of winter days, when the sky seems to press the entire city under a layer of dense fog. At Woodlawn Cemetery, one of the oldest and most historic in the Bronx, the solemn silence was broken only by the muffled sound of footsteps on the damp grass and the restrained whispers of the mourners. It was the funeral of Mrs. Beatrice Helen Astor Caldwell, matriarch of one of the most respected families in New York's high society, known for her philanthropy and the real estate empire built over decades. The imposing, sealed mahogany casket was positioned over the structure that would lower it into the grave. Around it, about 50 people dressed in black formed a respectful semicircle. White flowers and elaborate arrangements framed the scene. The priest was already beginning the final prayers when a scream echoed through the cemetery, cutting the air like a sharp blade. "Stop this burial! She's not dead!" The silence that followed was deafening. Every head turned toward the source of the scream. It was Nancy, Beatrice's caregiver, a woman in her early 40s, her scrubs still stained and wrinkled, her eyes wide with absolute panic. She was running toward the casket, stumbling over her own feet, her hands outstretched as if to physically stop the burial from proceeding. The attendees erupted in murmurs, faces contorted with a mix of shock, indignation, and disbelief. Some took a step back, as if the woman were carrying some contagious disease. Others glanced at each other, seeking confirmation that they had really heard what they thought they heard. In the midst of the confusion, one person remained completely still. Maria Flores was 42 years old and had worked as a housekeeper in the Caldwell mansion on the elegant Upper East Side for 15 years. She stood there slightly apart from the main circle of mourners, as was expected of someone in her position. She wore a simple, unadorned black dress and clutched a small purse with her intertwined hands. Her brown eyes, always observant and kind, were now fixed on Nancy, with an intensity no one around her noticed. Because Maria had recognized something, not just the desperation in Nancy's voice, but the exact words she used. "Stop this burial." That phrase, that code. A chill ran down her spine, and her fingers turned ice-cold. She and Mrs. Caldwell had agreed on this signal years ago on a rainy afternoon during a conversation that should never have happened. Maria closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself return to that memory. It had been 3 years ago, on a Sunday afternoon. She was cleaning the library when Mrs. Caldwell came in, looking more serious than usual. "Sit down, Maria, please," she had said, gesturing to the armchair next to hers. Maria had obeyed, uncomfortable. Employers didn't ask their housekeepers to sit down, but Mrs. Caldwell wasn't like other employers. She treated her with respect, asked about her family, remembered her children's birthdays. That afternoon, the elderly woman had held her hand and said something Maria would never forget. "Maria, you are the most loyal person I know in this house, more loyal than my own blood at times. I need to tell you something, and I need you to keep a secret. If you ever hear someone say, 'Stop this burial,' know that I am in danger, that something terrible is happening, and that only you can help me." Maria had agreed, without fully understanding. Mrs. Caldwell had seemed so fragile in that moment, so vulnerable, that she hadn't had the courage to ask what exactly she was afraid of. Now, 3 years later, facing that sealed casket and Nancy's desperate cry, it all made terrifying sense. Nancy kept screaming, trying to get closer to the casket, while 2 cemetery security guards held her by the arms. "She's not dead. You don't understand. She was alive last night. I saw her. I was there. Please, believe me." Gregory Henry Caldwell, Beatrice's only son, strode toward Nancy, his face twisted in anger. He was a tall man of 50, with perfectly coiffed gray hair and an Italian suit that cost more than Maria made in a year. Beside him, his wife Patricia, a woman of calculated beauty, and a cold gaze watched the scene with her lips pressed into a thin line. "This woman is clearly disturbed," Gregory declared in an authoritative voice. "She must be on something, or having a nervous breakdown. Security, please remove her immediately." Nancy struggled. "No, you don't understand. She told me the code. She told me to warn you if something happened. Stop this burial. Those words. She taught me those words." Maria felt her heart pound. Nancy knew. Mrs. Caldwell had told her too. That meant the situation was even more serious than she had imagined. She took a step forward, the word escaping her before she could think about the consequences. "Wait." It was just one word, spoken in a low tone, but something in its firmness made a few people turn. Gregory looked at her as if he had just noticed her presence for the first time. "Maria, isn't it? My mother's housekeeper." The tone was one of barely disguised contempt. Maria swallowed hard, but kept her posture straight. She knew her place, but she also knew the truth. And at that moment, the truth was more important than any social convention. "Mr. Caldwell, I know that phrase. Mrs. Caldwell told me to pay attention if anyone ever used it. She said it was a danger signal." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Gregory and Patricia exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance, but Maria caught it. There was something there, something they didn't want to come to light. Patricia stepped forward, her smile rehearsed and condescending. "Honey, I understand you were fond of Beatrice, but my mother-in-law was an elderly woman with many health problems. She said a lot of things in her final months. She confused reality with fantasy. You can't take everything she said so literally." Maria felt anger boil inside her. "She wasn't confused about anything," she replied, her voice stronger than she intended. "Mrs. Caldwell had the sharpest mind I've ever known. She told me this 3 years ago, when she was still perfectly healthy." Gregory took a threatening step toward her. "You're forgetting your place, Maria. This is a private ceremony. If you can't behave appropriately, I suggest you leave." Before Maria could respond, a new voice cut through the air. It was Walter Marshall, the family's lawyer for over 20 years, a man in his 60s with white hair and a posture that inspired confidence. He had been observing everything in silence, but now he approached with slow, deliberate steps. "Gregory, I think we should hear what these women have to say." "Walter, for God's sake," Gregory began, but the lawyer held up a hand. "I knew Beatrice for decades. She was an extremely cautious woman and worried about her safety, especially in recent years. If she created emergency codes with her staff, she had her reasons. And given the recent events involving the will and the distribution of assets, I think it's prudent we investigate before proceeding." The will, Maria thought. Of course. Mrs. Caldwell had mentioned she was making significant changes. She had said she was tired of the greed she saw around her, that she wanted to make sure her legacy would be used for good. Did Gregory know about these changes? Nancy, who had been released by the guards but remained under watch, seized the moment. "Please, Mr. Marshall," she pleaded, her voice choked with emotion. "I know how this sounds. I know it sounds crazy. But Mrs. Caldwell told me that if anything happened to her suddenly, I should use those exact words. She said there were people I could trust if I used that code, and one of them was Maria." All eyes turned to Maria again. She felt the weight of responsibility crush her shoulders. Mrs. Caldwell had trusted her. She had chosen her, a simple housekeeper, to be her guardian in case of danger, and now that moment had arrived. "It's true," Maria confirmed, her voice steady despite her fear. "Mrs. Caldwell told me the same thing. She was afraid of something. She didn't tell me what exactly, but she made it clear that if I heard those words, I had to act." Mr. Marshall looked at the sealed casket and then at Gregory. "How long was Mrs. Caldwell ill?" Gregory hesitated. "She had a fall 2 weeks ago, hit her head. She was disoriented." "And why is the casket sealed?" "Out of respect," Patricia interjected quickly. "She had injuries. We didn't want people to remember her that way." Marshall didn't look convinced. "Where is the death certificate? Who was the attending physician?" "A private doctor," Gregory answered with growing irritation. "Everything was done according to the law." "Then there should be no problem presenting the documentation," Marshall said calmly. And considering the unusual circumstances, I suggest we open the casket to confirm the identity and condition of the body before we proceed." Gregory turned, visibly pale. "That's absurd. It's disrespectful to my mother." "Or a necessary precaution," Marshall retorted. "Gregory, if there's nothing to hide, what's the problem?" The silence that followed was thick with tension. Maria watched Gregory and Patricia exchange glances again, and this time she saw something that terrified her. Panic. Real panic. What had they done? Before anyone could answer, Nancy collapsed. She fell to her knees on the damp ground, her hands covering her face, and began to sob uncontrollably. "I can't take it anymore," she cried out between tears. "I can't carry this alone. She's alive. Or she was. I don't know anymore. But she's not in that casket. I swear on everything holy, she is not in that casket." The cemetery erupted in voices. Some demanded Nancy be removed. Others wanted the casket opened. Mr. Marshall tried to calm everyone down while pulling out his cell phone to make a call. Maria remained where she was, her heart beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. And then, amid the chaos, she heard Mrs. Caldwell's voice in her mind, as clear as if the elderly woman were standing beside her. "Trust yourself, Maria. You're stronger than you think, and when the time comes, you'll know what to do." Maria took a deep breath. The time had come, and she wouldn't let down the woman who had treated her like family when her own blood had betrayed her. She approached Mr. Marshall and touched his arm gently. "Sir," she said quietly, "there's something else you need to know. For the last 3 months, Mrs. Caldwell was being given very strong sedatives. I saw the pills. I asked her about them, and she told me she didn't know where they came from, that she would wake up confused with the pills next to her bed. She was scared, but she didn't know who to trust." Marshall looked at her with renewed attention. "Do you have proof of this?" "I have the names of the medications written down. Mrs. Caldwell asked me to write everything down. She said she might need it one day." Maria opened her purse and took out a small black-covered notebook. Her hands trembled as she handed it to the lawyer. Mr. Marshall quickly flipped through the pages, his eyes widening with every line he read. "Enjoying this story? Tell me what you think of it, and how you think it will end." Mr. Marshall closed the notebook slowly, but Maria noticed that his hands were trembling too. The lawyer was known for his composure, for his ability to remain calm in even the most tense situations. But now, as he looked at Gregory and Patricia, there was something different in his eyes. There was certainty, and there was contained fury. "Gregory, we need to talk," Marshall said, his voice low but charged with authority. "Now." "There's nothing to talk about," Gregory retorted, but his voice sounded hollow, lacking its earlier arrogance. "You're all going crazy. My mother passed away from natural causes and deserves to be buried with dignity. Then you won't mind if I call the police and request the presence of a medical examiner before we proceed with the burial." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Mr. Marshall already had his phone in his hand, dialing. Gregory took a step forward, his face red with rage. "You have no authority to do that." "Actually, I do. As the executor of Beatrice's will and legally responsible for her assets until everything is settled, I have a duty to ensure everything is done as she wished. And given that serious accusations are being made, I need to investigate." Patricia, who had remained relatively calm until now, lost her composure. "You'll pay for this," she hissed, looking directly at Maria and Nancy. "Both of you, jealous maids trying to stir up trouble, trying to tarnish the reputation of a respectable family. We'll sue you for defamation, for emotional distress, for—" Her voice was cut, off by the arrival of an elderly woman approaching with the help of a cane. Maria recognized her immediately. It was Helen Sampson, Beatrice's friend since childhood, an 82-year-old woman with a mind as sharp as a razor and an even sharper tongue. "Patricia, dear," Helen said with a venomous sweetness, "I suggest you shut that mouth of yours before you say something that truly incriminates you, because I'm also starting to find all of this very suspicious." She turned to Mr. Marshall. "Walter, my old friend, tell me what's going on, and don't spare me the details." While the Lawyer explained the situation to Helen. Maria felt a hand on her arm. It was Nancy who had approached silently. The caregiver's eyes were red from crying, but there was a new determination in them. "I need to tell you everything," Nancy whispered. "Everything I know, but not here, not with them listening." Maria nodded, but before they could move away, Mr. Marshall called them over. "You two, come with me. The police are on their way, and you'll need to give a statement. Gregory, Patricia, I suggest you do the same." The next few minutes were a blur of motion. More people arrived. A police car pulled up at the cemetery entrance. A medical examiner was dispatched. The priest, completely at a loss, decided to temporarily suspend the ceremony. The guests dispersed, some indignant, others curious, all of them murmuring theories about what was really happening. Maria found herself sitting on a stone bench next to Nancy, while a police officer took their statements. She told him everything. The conversation with Mrs. Caldwell 3 years ago, the secret code, the suspicious medications, the changes in her employer's behavior over the last few months. Beside her, Nancy did the same, her voice breaking with every sentence. When it was time to open the casket, Maria felt like she was going to faint. She didn't want to be there. She didn't want to see. But she couldn't walk away either. She had to know the truth. She had to know what had happened to the woman who had treated her with such kindness for all those years. The medical examiner opened the casket slowly, with the gravity appropriate for the moment. Maria squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the worst. But when the silence stretched on for too long, she opened them again. Mr. Marshall was pale. Helen Sampson brought a hand to her chest. The police officer spoke urgently into his radio, and Gregory and Patricia just stood frozen, like statues of salt, because the casket was empty, or rather, not exactly empty. Inside were bags of sand, carefully arranged under a white cloth, shaped to resemble a body from a distance. But there was no body. There was no Beatrice. Maria felt her legs give way. Nancy let out a scream and collapsed into the arms of a female officer who had just arrived. Helen Sampson approached the empty casket and looked directly at Gregory. "Where is she?" The old woman's voice was like steel. "Where is my friend, you scoundrel?" Gregory opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Patricia, beside him, began to back away slowly, but another officer blocked her path. The mask of sophistication and control had fallen away completely. All that was left was raw, naked panic. The detective who had taken charge of the scene approached the couple. "Mr. Gregory Caldwell, Mrs. Patricia Caldwell, you're going to have to come with us to the station for questioning, and I strongly suggest you start cooperating because your situation just became extremely complicated." "We don't know anything," Patricia said hastily. "Someone must have switched the body. Someone is trying to frame us." "Then who signed the death certificate?" the detective questioned. "Who was the attending physician?" "A private doctor," Gregory repeated, but his voice sounded desperate now. Dr. Robert Miller. He was the one taking care of my mother." "Full name, license number, address," the detective ordered, nodding to another officer to take notes. As Gregory stammered out the information, Maria felt Nancy tug on her sleeve. She discreetly moved away with the caregiver, taking advantage of the fact that everyone was focused on the couple. "Maria," Nancy whispered, looking around to make sure no one was listening, "I know where she is, or where she was the last time I saw her." Maria's heart leaped. "Where?" "The estate, the old family estate up in the Catskills. I followed them the night they said she died. I saw them take her there. She was alive, Maria, confused, sedated, but alive. I tried to help. I swear I tried, but they threatened me. They said if I told anyone, they'd kill me too." "Why? Didn't you go to the police right away?" Nancy looked down, ashamed. "I was scared. I'm just a caregiver. They're rich, powerful. Who would believe me?" But then I thought of the phrase, the code Mrs. Caldwell had taught me, and I realized I had to do something, even if it meant risking my own life. Maria took Nancy's hands. "You did the right thing. And now we're going to finish what we started. We're telling the detective." They approached the group, and Maria got the detective's attention. He turned impatient. "What is it now?" The caregiver knows where Mrs. Caldwell might be. All eyes turned to Nancy. The detective moved in quickly. Talk. Nancy took a deep breath and told him everything. The estate in the Catskills, the night she saw Gregory and Patricia take a sedated Beatrice away, the threats she received. As she spoke, Gregory's face grew paler and paler. Patricia tried to run, but was restrained by 2 officers. "You're under arrest," the detective declared, "on suspicion of kidnapping, false imprisonment, document forgery, and attempted murder. And if that woman isn't found alive, the charges are going to get a lot worse." Gregory finally broke down. "She's alive," he said, his voice cracking. "She's alive. We just wanted the money, the will. She was going to leave everything to charities. Everything. I was going to be left with nothing after waiting my whole life." "So you decided to kill her?" Helen's voice was laced with disgust. "No, it wasn't supposed to be like that. We just wanted her to be confused enough to be declared incompetent, so I could take over the business. But she stayed lucid. She kept saying she was going to disinherit us. So Patricia had the idea to make her disappear, for a while, until we could forge a new version of the will." "And the fake funeral?" the detective questioned. "It was to make sure no one asked any questions. If everyone thought she was dead and buried, they'd stop looking." Patricia spat venom. "That old hag was ruining our lives. Everything we built, everything we deserved, she was going to throw away on strangers." "You didn't deserve anything," Maria said, her voice rising higher than she intended. "She loved you. She would have given you everything if you had shown an ounce of real love in return. But all you ever saw was money. You never saw the person." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Patricia looked at Maria with pure hatred, but said nothing. What could she say? The truth had been laid bare, raw and brutal. "Let's go," the detective ordered, signaling for Gregory and Patricia to be taken to the patrol cars. "And you," he said, pointing to Nancy, "are going to take us to this estate. Now, every minute could make a difference." "I'm going too," Maria declared. "Ma'am, this isn't—" "I'm going too," Maria repeated more firmly this time. "Mrs. Caldwell trusted me. She needs to see a friendly face when we find her. If we find her." The detective hesitated, but Mr. Marshall intervened. "Let her go. Beatrice would want Maria there." The detective nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but you stay in the car and only approach when I say it's safe." Maria agreed. She, Nancy, the detective, and 3 other officers got into 2 squad cars and headed for the Catskills. The drive took nearly 2 hours, time that seemed to stretch on infinitely. Maria stared out the window, watching the urban landscape of New York City gradually give way to greener, more mountainous terrain. The sky was still grey, but now a few breaks in the clouds allowed rays of sun to pierce through. When they finally arrived at the estate, Maria felt a tightness in her chest. It was a beautiful place, an old house surrounded by trees with a commanding view of the hills. But there was something sinister in its abandoned state, with dark windows and a heavy silence in the air. The officers went in first, guns drawn. Maria and Nancy waited anxiously in the car. Minutes felt like hours, and then finally a shout. "In here, we've got someone!" Maria was out of the car before she could think, running toward the house. An officer tried to stop her, but she dodged him, heading down the stairs that led to a damp, dark basement. And there, on a dirty mattress on the floor, wrapped in thin blankets, was Beatrice. The elderly woman was conscious, but she could barely keep her eyes open. Her skin was pale, her lips cracked from dehydration. But when she saw Maria, something flickered in her gaze. Recognition. Relief. "Maria," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Maria fell to her knees beside her, tears streaming down her face. "I'm here, ma'am, I'm here, you're safe now." Beatrice tried to smile but didn't have the strength. You remembered," she managed to say. "The code. You remembered." "I remembered. And we're getting you out of here. We're taking you to the hospital, and everything is going to be okay." The paramedics arrived quickly, placing Beatrice on a stretcher with extreme care. Maria held her hand through the entire process, refusing to let go until it was absolutely necessary. And even as the ambulance pulled away, sirens, Cutting through the afternoon air, Maria felt a part of herself go with it, because she had promised to protect Beatrice, and this time, against all odds, she had succeeded. It was night by the time Maria was finally able to see Beatrice again at St. Jude's Medical Center in Midtown. She had spent the last 6 hours in the waiting room, refusing to go home, ignoring her hunger and exhaustion. Nancy was there too, sitting in a corner, curled into herself, consumed by a guilt that no words of comfort seemed to soothe. When the doctor finally came out of the ICU, Maria shot to her feet so quickly she felt dizzy. "How is she?" she asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. The doctor, a woman in her 40s with tired but kind eyes, sighed. "She's stable, dehydrated, malnourished, with clear signs of long-term sedative poisoning. But she's alive and conscious. It will take time for her to recover fully, but the prognosis is good." Maria felt her legs weaken with relief. "Can I see her?" "For a few minutes. She needs to rest." The ICU was a place of soft lights and mechanical sounds, a world apart where life balanced on a tightrope. Beatrice was in a bed near the window, connected to monitors and IV drips. Her eyes were closed, but when Maria approached and gently touched her hand, they fluttered open. "My dear Maria," Beatrice said, her voice weak but clear, "you saved my life." Maria couldn't hold back her tears. "You saved mine first, ma'am. When you gave me a job, when you treated my children like your own grandchildren, when you taught me to read better so I could help them with their homework. You gave me dignity when the world only offered me contempt." Beatrice squeezed her hand with what little strength she had. "I always knew you were special, from the very first day. You have a pure heart, Maria, and a pure heart is the rarest thing in this world." They were silent for a moment, just holding hands, sharing a connection that went beyond words. Finally, Beatrice spoke again. "My son, Gregory. Did he really do this to me?" Maria didn't know how to answer. How do you tell a mother her son tried to kill her? How do you break a heart that has already been so shattered? "He's confused, Mom. He and Patricia. They became obsessed with money and power. But they'll pay for what they did. Justice will be served." Beatrice closed her eyes, and a single tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. "I created a monster. I gave him everything, and in return he gave me betrayal. You didn't create anything. His choices are his own. You only showed him love, and if he couldn't return it, that's his fault, not yours." Beatrice opened her eyes again, and there was a new determination in them. "Maria, I need you to make me a promise." "Anything, ma'am. When I get out of here, when I'm strong again, I'm going to change everything. I'm going to use my fortune, my name, my influence, to create something that truly matters. A foundation, a place where people like you, good, honest people who are invisible to the world, can find support and opportunities. And I want you to work with me, not as a housekeeper, but as a partner, as a friend." Maria was speechless. Her mind couldn't process what she was hearing. Her, a housekeeper with no formal education, being asked to work alongside one of the wealthiest women in New York. I don't know if I'm qualified to—" "You're qualified in the ways that matter," Beatrice interrupted. "You have integrity, you have compassion, you have courage. Those are the qualifications that really count. The rest we can learn." Before Maria could reply, a nurse entered discreetly. "I'm sorry, but the patient needs to rest now." Maria nodded and stood up, but Beatrice still held her hand. "Thank you," the old woman whispered, "for believing in me when no one else did. I'll always believe in you, always." Maria left the ICU with her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. She found Mr. Marshall in the waiting room, talking with the detective who had led the operation. They both turned as she approached. "How is she?" Marshall asked. "She's going to recover. She's stronger than she looks." The detective nodded. "That's a relief, and good news for the case too. With her conscious and able to testify, we'll have much stronger evidence against Gregory and Patricia." "Will they be convicted?" Maria asked. "With the evidence we have, absolutely. Attempted murder, kidnapping, false imprisonment, document fraud. They're going to spend a long time in prison. Maria should have felt satisfaction at this, but all she felt was sadness. Sadness for Beatrice, who would have to live with the pain of knowing her own son had tried to kill her. Sadness for Gregory, who had thrown away the chance to have a wonderful mother in exchange for money he didn't even need. Sadness for the waste of it all. In the weeks that followed, the story spread like wildfire. The media loved it. Wealthy matriarch, nearly buried alive by her own son. It was the kind of story that sold papers and generated clicks. Maria found herself at the center of a media storm she never wanted. Reporters camped outside her modest home in Jamaica, Queens. They offered her money for exclusive interviews. They wanted to turn her into a hero. But Maria refused every offer. She hadn't done it for fame or money. She had done it for love, for loyalty, because it was the right thing to do. Beatrice was discharged after 3 weeks. Maria was there that day, along with Mr. Marshall, Helen Sampson, and a handful of other people who truly cared for the elderly woman. There were no family members. Gregory and Patricia were in jail awaiting trial. Other distant relatives had shown their true colors in the preceding weeks, calling only to ask about the inheritance, about what would happen to the money. The first thing Beatrice did after leaving the hospital was visit Nancy. The caregiver was out on bail but facing charges of negligence for not reporting the crime immediately. She was living with her sister, consumed by a deep depression. When Beatrice arrived, Nancy couldn't even look at her. "I'm so sorry," she repeated between sobs. "I'm so sorry. I should have done more. I should have been braver." Beatrice sat beside her and took her hands. "You were scared. It's human to be scared. But when it mattered, when it really counted, you found your courage. You screamed that code in the cemetery knowing you could be punished, humiliated, ignored. But you did it anyway. That's real courage." Nancy finally looked up at her. "How can you forgive me?" "Because I understand. I know what it's like to be afraid of powerful people. I know what it's like to feel your voice doesn't matter. But your voice did matter, Nancy. Your voice saved me," they cried. Together, two women who had been deemed insignificant by the world, but had proven themselves stronger than anyone could have imagined. 2 months later, the foundation was officially launched, the Beatrice Caldwell Institute for Elder Protection and Dignity, a modern building in the Flatiron district with rooms for legal counseling, social services, support groups, and a hotline for reporting abuse. Maria was there on opening day, dressed in a simple but elegant suit that Beatrice had insisted on buying for her. "You're the executive director now," Beatrice had said with a smile. "You need to dress the part." Executive director. Maria still couldn't believe it. She, who 3 months ago was cleaning toilets and cooking for a family that barely acknowledged her existence, was now leading an organization that would help thousands of people. The inaugural speech was given by Beatrice, and Maria stood by her side on the stage, looking out at the crowd that had gathered. There were politicians, business leaders, representatives from other non-profits, and also ordinary people. Seniors who had suffered abuse, caregivers who needed support, families seeking guidance. "I almost died," Beatrice began, her voice echoing through the speakers. "I was betrayed by the one I loved most. I was drugged, kidnapped, and nearly buried alive. But I survived. And do you know why? Because of a woman the world considered invisible. A housekeeper no one thought mattered. But she mattered. She matters. And through this institute, we will prove that everyone matters." The applause was deafening. Maria felt tears stream down her face, but for the first time in a long time, they were tears of joy. The trial of Gregory and Patricia took place 4 months after the attempted burial. Maria was there, sitting behind Beatrice, offering silent support as the elderly woman testified against her own son. It was painful to watch. Gregory cried, begged for forgiveness, said he was sorry, but when the prosecutor asked if he would have stopped if he hadn't been caught, he fell silent. Patricia, on the other hand, remained defiant to the end. She claimed they were victims of circumstance, that society had forced them to take extreme measures, that Beatrice was a stubborn old woman who was ruining their lives. Her own lawyer seemed embarrassed by her defense. The verdict was unanimous. Gregory was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Patricia, 15. The courtroom erupted. in murmurs. Beatrice remained impassive, but Maria saw her hands tremble as she clutched her handkerchief. Afterward, outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Beatrice. "How do you feel?" they shouted. "Will you forgive your son? What will you do now?" Beatrice stopped and looked directly at the cameras. "I feel sadness. Sadness for the waste of potential, the waste of love. But I also feel hope. Because I've discovered that real family isn't defined by blood, but by loyalty, by unconditional love, by being there when it matters most. And I have a family that saved me, a family that I chose." She looked at Maria, who was standing beside her, and smiled. "This is my daughter, not by biology, but by heart, and I am more proud of her than I have ever been of any of my own accomplishments." Maria couldn't hold back her tears. She hugged Beatrice right there in front of the cameras, in front of the whole world. And in that moment, she understood something fundamental. True love doesn't come with guarantees. It doesn't come with shared blood or signed papers. It comes with choices. The choice to be there, to believe, to fight. And she and Beatrice had made that choice for each other. 3 years had passed since that grey afternoon at Woodlawn Cemetery. 3 years since a desperate scream changed the fate of so many lives. The Beatrice Caldwell Institute for Elder Protection and Dignity had become a national benchmark, with branches in 5 states and plans to expand to many more. Thousands of seniors had been helped, hundreds of abuse cases had been reported and resolved, and American society was slowly beginning to change how it viewed and treated its elders. Maria woke up early that Saturday morning. The apartment in Brooklyn Heights still felt surreal to her. 3 bedrooms, a beautiful view, a safe neighborhood where her kids could play outside without fear. She still caught herself sometimes, waking up in the middle of the night, convinced it was all a dream, and that she would soon be back in her 2-room apartment in Jamaica, Queens. But it wasn't a dream. It was real as the framed diploma on the living room wall, certifying that Maria Flores had completed a course in non-profit management. As real as the photo next to the diploma, showing her and Beatrice cutting the ribbon at the opening of the Institute's 3rd branch in Chicago. Her children, Raphael, 15, and Julia, 12, were still asleep. Maria made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the newspaper. In the politics section, an article caught her eye. It was about a new bill being voted on in Congress, a law that would mandate the creation of elder protection committees in every American municipality with over 50,000 inhabitants. At the end of the article, there was a mention of the Beatrice Caldwell Institute as one of the main advocates for the legislation. Maria smiled. They were making a difference, really making a difference. Her phone rang. It was Beatrice, now 84, but with an energy that was the envy of many younger people. "Good morning, my dear. You haven't forgotten about today, have you?" "How could I forget?" Maria replied warmly. "I'll be there in an hour." Today was a special day, not just because it was Saturday, but because it was the Foundation's 3rd anniversary, and more importantly, it was the day they would receive a visit from Nancy, who had just been released from prison after serving her reduced sentence, for good behavior and cooperation with the authorities. Maria arrived at the Institute's headquarters at 9 in the morning. The building was decorated with balloons and banners. Volunteers were already setting up tables for the special lunch that would be served to their clients. Beatrice was in the inner garden, supervising the gardener, the same Mr. Antonio who had worked at the Upper East Side mansion and now lovingly tended to the Institute's plants. "Is it looking good?" Maria asked, referring to the new rose bed they were planting. Mr. Antonio smiled, his hands still steady despite his 72 years. "Perfect, Miss Flores. These roses will bloom beautifully. You can count on it." Beatrice hugged Maria. "Today is an important day," she said, "not just for the celebration, but for what it represents. 3 years of rebuilding, 3 years of proving that it's possible to turn pain into purpose. And proving that you're stronger than any attempt to destroy you." "We are stronger," Beatrice corrected, "because none of this would have been possible if you hadn't had the courage to believe in me." At 11 o'clock, a taxi pulled up in front of the Institute. Nancy stepped out thinner, her hair whiter, but with something different in her eyes. There was a peace there that hadn't existed before, an acceptance, a redemption earned through great suffering. Maria ran to hug her. Nancy started crying before she could even say a word. "I didn't think you'd really have me back," she managed to say between sobs. "After everything that happened, after how I failed." "You didn't fail," Beatrice said, approaching slowly with the help of her elegant cane. "You were afraid. And when you found your courage, you used it. That's what matters." Nancy fell to her knees, crying even harder. Beatrice bent down with some difficulty and placed her hands on her face. "Get up, my dear, you've knelt enough. Now it's time to walk with your head held high." The anniversary party was emotional. There were nearly 200 people there, including staff, volunteers, clients, and partners of the Institute. Speeches were made, stories were told, tears were shed. And when it was Nancy's turn to speak, a respectful silence fell over the room. She walked up to the small stage set up in the garden, her hands trembling as she held the microphone. "For a long time I hated myself," she began. "I hated my cowardice, my weakness, my inability to do the right thing at the right time. But someone taught me, in prison, during one of the therapy sessions the Institute provided for me, that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about using the lessons of the past to build a better future." She looked directly at Beatrice and Maria. "That's why I want to announce today that I'm going to join the Institute, not as an employee, I'm not qualified for that yet, but as a volunteer. I'm going to work the abuse hotline, helping other caregivers who, like me, might be facing pressure and threats, because I understand the fear they feel, and I can help them find their courage." The applause was warm and genuine. Nancy came down from the stage and was immediately enveloped in hugs. Maria saw Beatrice discreetly wipe away a tear and went over to her. "Are you okay?" "I'm more than okay," the old woman replied with a smile. "I'm whole. You know, Maria, for a long time I thought family was about blood, about a last name, about inheritance, but I was wrong. Family is about who chooses to stay when things get hard. It's about who fights for you when it would be easier to give up, and I have the best family anyone could ask for." The afternoon continued with music, food, and lots of conversation. Helen Sampson, now 85 but still as sharp as ever, entertained a group of volunteers with stories from her youth. Mr. Marshall, who had become the Institute's pro bono lawyer, discussed legal strategies with other partner attorneys. Mr. Antonio showed the garden to a group of seniors interested in therapeutic gardening. As the sun began to set, painting the New York sky in shades of orange and pink, Maria found herself alone in the garden for a moment. She looked around at all the life, all the joy, all the purpose, and allowed herself to feel proud, proud of what they had built, proud of who she had become. "Maria?" a voice called. It was Raphael, her son, who had just arrived with Julia. "Mom, Mrs. Caldwell wants to make a toast." Maria smiled and followed her son back inside. Everyone was gathered in the main room, glasses of champagne or juice in hand. Beatrice was in the center, radiant despite her advanced age. "I want to make a toast," she announced, her voice still firm and clear, "but not a toast to survival, though I certainly have survived, and not a toast to success, though this institute is more successful than I ever dreamed. I want to make a toast to the invisible people, to those the world ignores, that society discards, but who carry an incredible strength within them. Maria, you were invisible. Nancy, you were invisible. Mr. Antonio, you were invisible. But you changed the world, you changed my life, and through this institute you will change millions of other lives." She raised her glass. "So I toast to you, to the invisible who became impossible to ignore, to those who proved that courage doesn't have to shout to be heard, and to true love, which knows no barriers of class, age, or social expectation." Everyone raised their glasses. "To the invisible," echoed through the hall. That night, after everyone had gone home, Maria and Beatrice sat in the garden, just enjoying the comfortable silence of each other's company. The stars were beginning to appear in the sky, fighting against the city's light pollution. "You know what I think sometimes," Beatrice said softly. "I think everything happened exactly as it was meant to." Maria looked at her, surprised. "Even the bad part? Even what Gregory and Patricia did? Even that? Because it taught me something essential. It taught me that true love can't be bought or inherited. It has to be chosen, cultivated, nurtured. Gregory was my son by blood, but you are my daughter by heart, and the heart always wins." Maria took her hand, and they sat there as the night deepened over New York. Two women whom fate had brought together in the most unlikely way, but who were now inseparable. Two survivors who had turned trauma into triumph, pain into purpose, betrayal into a tribute to human resilience. Years later, when Beatrice finally passed away at the age of 90, she was surrounded by those who truly loved her. Maria was by her side, holding her hand, whispering words of comfort as the old woman took her last breaths. There was no fear in Beatrice's eyes, only peace. The peace of knowing she had lived well, loved well, and left a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. The funeral this time was a celebration. There were no sealed caskets or dark secrets, just a crowd of people whose lives had been touched by Beatrice, seniors who were saved from abuse, caregivers who found support and guidance, families who were reconciled, volunteers who discovered purpose. And at the center of it all was Maria, now the permanent director of the Institute, delivering the eulogy. "She taught me," Maria said, her voice clear despite her tears, "that it's never too late to start over. That it's never too late to choose love over fear, hope over despair, action over resignation. She taught me that a life isn't measured by what we accumulate, but by what we give away. And she gave everything, her time, her fortune, her heart. She was betrayed by those who should have loved her, but she chose to love even harder. She chose to turn her pain into purpose, and that purpose will live on forever." When Beatrice's body was finally laid to rest, Maria placed a single white rose on the casket. A rose from the Institute's garden, grown by the hands of Mr. Antonio, watered with the same love and care that Beatrice had, poured over everyone she met. And as the sun set once more over New York, Maria knew this wasn't an end. It was just a transition, because the legacy of Beatrice Astor Caldwell wasn't in her fortune or her name. It was in the hearts she touched, the lives she transformed, and the living proof that one act of courage can change everything. The Institute continued. It grew. It thrived. And with every senior saved, every report answered, every family reconciled, Beatrice's memory was honored, not with statues or grand monuments, but with the thing she valued most, human dignity. Maria lived to be 83, always at the helm of the institute she and Beatrice had built together. And when she too passed on, she was surrounded by her own chosen family, her children, Raphael and Julia, who had grown up seeing the power of compassion in action. Nancy, who never left the institute and became one of its most respected counselors, grandchildren, nieces and nephews, and hundreds of people whose lives had been changed by the work Maria dedicated her life to. On Maria's headstone, next to her name and dates, was a simple phrase that summed up everything. She had been everything she had achieved, everything she represented. A housekeeper who became a warrior, a friend who became a daughter, an invisible woman who changed the world. And in New York, in the halls of the Beatrice Caldwell Institute, there is a plaque that tells the full story. The story of a matriarch nearly buried alive, of a housekeeper who refused to be silent, of a caregiver who found redemption, and of how together they proved that courage doesn't have to shout to change the world. Sometimes courage is simply refusing to accept injustice, even when the full weight of society tells you that you don't matter. Because you do matter, everyone matters. And that is the lesson that Beatrice, Maria, and Nancy left for the world. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Beatrice and Maria has touched your hearts deeply. If you were moved by this journey of courage, loyalty, and unconditional love, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what part of this story resonated with you the most. Which moment made you reflect on the importance of valuing the people around us? Every day, we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest and truest side of the human soul. Stories that remind us of the strength that exists within each of us when we choose to do what's right. We'll see you in the next episode, where another incredible story will be revealed. Thank you so much for joining us.